introduction to AI. We have 6 tutorials overall. Next week, we're looking at video production. Then after that, new office practices, and finally a series on new software for the office. Today, we welcome back 3 of our long-standing colleagues, George Guida, Karla Saldaña Ochoa, and Smaro Katsangelou. What is interesting, I think, is in this year, we are updating our tutorials every year. And in a way, that's not enough. It should be every few months. But every year we're doing a new series of tutorials. But this time around, what is interesting is how some of our tutors have developed their own software platforms. And today we have George Guida, who launched Xfigura just a few weeks ago. And is joining in with us a whole series of these. Before this, we had Carlos Bagnon, who has Formas AI has just been launched, and that seems to be one of the things that has been developing over the last 12 months is the amount of new platforms that have been developed. Anyway, let's get going. I'm delighted to welcome George back. He is. Formerly he was working at Foster and Partners. Then he was teaching at Harvard GSD and MIT Media Lab, doing research MIT Media Lab, and currently now he's teaching at the University of Penn. He's an Italian American. So we have a complete list of, I think, immigrants, as it were, in today's tutors, all living in the States. Then we have Karla Saldaña Ochoa, originally from Ecuador. Karla went across to ETH and did a master's in landscape architecture before doing a PhD in AI and architecture. She's now a tenure-track faculty at the University of Florida. Also in Florida, we have Smaro Katsangelou, who is originally from Greece. She graduated from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And for those who don't know, Aristotle came from Thessaloniki. Smaro is in the unusual position of doing a PhD partly in a school of computer science. So a very kind of privileged position. Anyway, without further ado, let's get stuck into it. I'd like to. Sorry, I should go through the slides I had of this. I should have showed the work of George Guida, Karla Saldaña Ochoa, and Smaro Katsangelou. So let me invite George to share his screen. George, welcome.
Thanks so much, Neil. It's a real pleasure to come back year on year and give these updates. I have the same issue every time I teach an AI class. There's a lot of prep work and updating the content and updating all of the models, the Google Colab notebooks, and everything in between. So let me just pull this up. Okay. So I'm going to spend the next 15-20 minutes and take a deep dive again, as I've done in the last 2 years, into 3D workflow specifically, and I'll introduce a tool that we've been working on called Xfigura. So I'll start open source, and then we'll move into this tool, which blends these two ideas, open source, closed source models. Now, just to add to that introduction, I'm an architect by training. I did work many years at Foster's, and I since started Architag and AI and consultancy. We do architecture projects, but we work with a lot of firms on AI strategy. And a lot of this work fed into what we've since developed, and we gave the very first introduction in last year's Digital Futures. It was a completely undercooked version of what we have today. The product is much more mature, and I'll give you a glimpse into what this looks like in just a moment. I also really enjoy diving deep with my students on the new possibilities that architecture is bringing to the profession. So I take this as a moment to rethink architecture, rethink prototyping versus just the creative process, and then also rethinking AI as a startup, rethinking models, for example, software and the service model connected two into one. Okay, so let's start open source. I wanted to dive into the key place that you should always start in and to explore different open source models, and that is a platform or a website called Hugging Face. Now, Hugging Face, you can see it as a GitHub or a repository of many different things. So it has models, it has spaces where people share all of their work, and it has data sets. So lots of data sets are there. There's tutorials and a lot in between. So since we're in the online and working, covering this topic of 3D, I can give you a glimpse into some of the models that are out there. Now you can see once you enter into Hugging Face, there's this, one of the tabs is called Spaces. I have all my students, this is one of the Hello World exercises, enter into Hugging Face and try out one of the different spaces. Now, for this, you can click on 3D modeling, or you can specifically choose one which is called Part Packer. It was released by Microsoft, and essentially it's a model that permits you to segment your full 3D model. So it uses Dino Viewpoint 2. Essentially, it's segmenting the images and then reconstructing these into 3D models. Really interesting use case. We'll see, I'm sure, different applications in architecture coming up. And we also have a model like this in the platform. Some other models that are really interesting, I believe Karla is also working with this model. It's great because it's open source. It's one called Trellis. It was launched by Meta. It is a multi-view process. So it takes one single image and essentially it's creating multiple images of that single image. So it's predicting what is to the right, what is to the back of that image, and then reconstructing. Think of it as a photogrammetric process, but using AI to predict those middle grounds between two frames. And so you can get OBJ files, you can work with these. Meshes are a challenging thing, especially for us as architects. So I'll show you some alternatives to this. Now, there is a lot of noise, and this is something we tackle head on in Xfigura in the AI space. So these are just two resources I thought I'd extend to you guys in seeing at least how benchmarks or leaderboards assess these models. And going back to Hugging Face, I like to occasionally peek at this website. It's a 3D arena, and people can essentially vote between two models. And you can say, oh, okay, this one maybe on the right, B is better. And then you can see that leaderboard. So maybe CSM is the best for image to 3D model, but this is always depending on the subject, what you're working with. The other interesting one is this one. It's called LM Arena for all the other representations, a great resource also to use some models for free. Now, just diving deeper into some workflows, Gaussian splats, that's what came after our radiance fields, essentially permit you to do things like real-time rendering of photorealistic scenes. And essentially these are learned, these are trained models based on a small sample size of images. And so we took this together with the team, with Daniel, with Tatiana, Giovanna, Carlos, and Jean. We brought it to the Biennale and we used a video-to-video process to do a full reconstruction of these scenes, of these 3D models. We combined it with the whole carbon analysis and then speculatively added agents to assess these new designs and help us within a participatory design process. This is an accelerated video. Well, you're welcome to see it on the Architect website. But there's so many fun possibilities in this 3D space. Now, for video in particular, this has extended very recently into a concept called worlds. Now, it's important to remember all of the image and video models, they don't have that physics understanding. And so this model, which is recently launched by Google, there's some other models competing against this. This is called Genie 3. It's not actually open yet. Imagine it's a text prompt to world. So it's like a real-time video environment with that understanding of surroundings. It has spatial understanding and memory embedded into it. Now, what I'm most interested in recent times is how what's called vibe coding, it's a new fun term, is starting to penetrate into architecture. And so I teach students how to build tangible and digital interfaces. And this is an example of the possibilities. So you can prompt with a text prompt and get a full 3D modeling environment. So it's not hard to think very shortly, if not today. You're able to just think of an idea, even for architecture, and then build it into software or build it into a tangible tool. And so this vibe coding idea extends into what's called model context protocols, MCPs, where you can connect Blender, Rhino, any software, Revit, to automate some of these processes using the underlying script within it. So this is Claude on the left, automating a lot of this design process. It is imperfect today, but it's really alluding to some possibilities coming up. And this extends into things like Grasshopper, automations. We double down into this as well. This is a plugin by Moritz called in Food for Rhino called Raven, where you can do a text prompt and it creates that procedural logic in a Grasshopper script. And so you can have all those parameters and have the control, which we all really need as architects. So leaning into this idea of control and with all these tools in mind, I'm super excited to present Xfigura. We did launch about 4 or 5 months ago. We've seen a huge growth immediately. There's big need for these tools, especially in architecture, that gives architect this level of control. Now, in a nutshell, Xfigura can be seen as a collaborative environment. Think of it as a Miro where you can sketch, draw, share boards, but it's powered by AI. So you have all of the best models. We have 36, I think now, of the best image, text, video, upscaler, and 3D generative models all in one place. So imagine it as the accessible version of Comfy UI or the architect's version of Perplexity, not for text, but for all the other modalities, where you can bring in your own images, import your own 3D models with Speckle or OBJ or any other file format, and then do this whole workflow while keeping full history of your process. Now, a small glimpse into what we showed last year. This is what I showed in the Digital Futures last year. A prototype of the intent, diving deeper into 3D workflows, a quasi-working canvas, and that has since developed into a tool that now thousands use. We're partnering now with KPF, with OMA, Big, and Zaha, among many other firms and universities. Karla, I'm privileged for you to also be testing this out with some of your students are all using this within this, and students from all over, really. So it's been a real great growth. So it is one platform, 35 plus models, and the possibilities are really endless. We have prompt enhancers, text to render, all of these modalities. You can train your own models, and the image to image coherence is impeccable. You can in-paint regions. You can do video with a starting image and ending image, do image to 3D, speckle integrations, and I'll give you a glimpse right now into what I'm talking about. Okay, so the website is xfigura.ai, and after logging in with Get Started, you can access all of those boards that you have. And so I want to take this chance. First, I'll give you a brief introduction, but then I'll take it as a chance to dive deeper into some of these 3D workflows specifically. And so just a glimpse, maybe I'll pull out one of the boards I used with my UPenn class. And so this is a more complex board. The entry level exercise, you can switch to dark mode, is starting with a single node. And what you can see is that all of these nodes are actually all connected. So it's always going from left to right. For those who are comfortable with Grasshopper or Comfy, think of it as an accessible version that all architecture teams within any practice or students can really start engage with. And so just as a Hello World exercise, you can double click on the canvas or you can click on the left and you see all of those different modalities. So some students or some Any people might want to start using the latest GPT-5 model, and you might say a parametric tower in Miami, which is definitely a trending aesthetic in the AI space, I would say. So do be a bit more creative than I am. And so we're enhancing the prompt, and from here we can make our workflow. So I will then connect this to an image node, and then it's taking that image from the previous node, and then I can click generate, or I can branch this into and get variations. And so the beauty of what we've built is that now you have access to all of these models in one single place. And so in a canvas, which you can share, you can comment, you can draw sketches, there's so many fun possibilities. We launched Nano Banana. I know it's definitely a big trend now, which is the latest Google model, a great marketing name compared to the Flux. What was it called? The um, Flash 2.5, which wasn't a great name actually. So it certainly hit the web, and the quality of these models, the coherence based on that input, even from an image to image perspective, is really impeccable. And so you can see from there, the journey really continues however you want it to. And you might say, make this in, oops, this input image into a night scene. And so here we're going to use, let's see, I'm going to connect this image node right here. And we can prompt the Nano Banana model, which is actually now our default model. So for image to image, we do host our own models for full data security, but we also offer all of the other fun models. And one I really love is Magnific Mystic, the Flux Context Max models, you name it. So you can really see the level of coherence that we're working towards. This is the output, and you can compare it one for one. All the geometry remains consistent, and you can edit scenes in just moments. So what I'm saying is you can then create videos, 3D models, upscale in Paint. You can really be fully creative where you then go next. Okay, so just to dive deeper into some workflows, just expanding on the image space. I'm obviously a big archigram. I love the images, the representation shows pushing the boundaries not only into that hyper realistic, but also into the sketchy, the conceptual, the more human aesthetic. So we can take this as an input, this as a style, combine it, apply it, or do the opposite. So bring in, I'm more interested in the lower one actually. So bring in that archigram touch applied to this, Zahadi-esque image, and then bring that, human, that sketch-like aesthetic. And so you can really see that coherence between those two geometries. Okay, so I wanted to take this a step further and see how you can take these 2D images and bring these into 3D geometries. And as a glimpse into some more complex workflow, you can really see, if you haven't tested these models out, how powerful this nano banana model is. And so you can see from an input image here, I've connected that node to show the various options. So you can change the lighting, you can remove all of the people from a scene. For example, here, in one prompt, you're removing everyone. In one prompt, we are simply changing the whole facade material, and you can see the brass metal cladding prompt on the right. You can build a texture or prompt it to build a tile from Valencia, and then bring it into the second node, and then apply that texture with full coherence. So rendering is really going to change, and I'm so excited by this. You can enhance your prompt. You can say connect it to another node, add people, add a horror-esque aesthetic, change the styles, change the cameras. And so can we then leverage these models to start producing from, for example, floor plan, some 3D geometry. So that brings me to, let's see, the video. Video is an incredible space. If you haven't tested out some of the video models, single frame to video, where you can use the Nano Banana model to create a different view of your same scene, and then combine those two images with the latest models into one single animation, where you can then upscale using the Runway Aleph model or upscale these videos. We have a lot of demand actually in this video space. Okay, I'm digressing from the 3D focus. So Speckle is there. Let me see. 3D workflows. Here we go. Okay, so 3D, we have at the core, we're currently mainly working with meshes. So the simple workflow becomes text to image and then image to 3D model. And so you can see these are four of the many models of the models we have for 3D. Each one produces different quality results. And so it's always worth testing out. You can export these, you can work with them. You can also 3D print them, which I've done lots of. Or you can start pushing them into your production workflows. So let's say we have a facade. Let's iterate on that facade and reach maybe a design intent. Great for competitions or moving fast. We then isolate the individual module with the Nano Banana model from that input geometry. And then we can create a single facade unit. We can render it from different views and then reconstruct that into a 3D model. Now, in other videos, or I posted this on social media, you can then take this geometry and then have full control. So you can take that, bring it into Grasshopper, into Rhino, make a facade system, and then save so much time in that iterative process. And so a great other use case is also in furniture. I have 3D printed this actually, and without post-processing, it gets you an incredible result from this single image. You can also generate multiple images to condition a 3D result. Now I'll take the last 2 or so minutes to show you two last workflows in which you can actually connect your, I love to go in dark mode actually. So you can connect your model with Speckle and then do an image to image workflow with that coherence after choosing a view you want to choose it from. And so this is something you can also do with our latest agent, in which we just launched, where you can do a text prompt and then automate the whole workflow. And this is just going to get better. So you'll see all the nodes populating right here. And the very last one is this a text to procedural 3D geometry, so text to parametric model. And so here it is a text prompt. This is completely free. It is in beta now. It is based from language. And so from a single text prompt, you can see it here. We are creating a full procedural model with every time new parameters, 21 in this case. And so you can pull these with sliders, you can edit these, and then you can generate a video and do that same workflow. So a lot of possibilities in the 3D space. This is definitely this LLM, large language model, vibe coded approach is definitely going to see a lot more development, and happy to see what you guys produce. As a very last slide for some resources for Xfigura, feel free to go to, feel free to go back to the last year's content or access some of the workshops I've taught on 3D or recently with Futurely, or some conversations with NCARB. We just launched the REBA report. I'm in the REBA Expert Advisory Group. And if you are interested in joining Xfigura, feel free to join us here, our newsletter, or for any students, we have launched an affiliate program. So do apply if interested. Thanks everyone for listening. Look forward to seeing what you guys produce.
Thanks, George. Can I just ask a couple of quick questions? And also just to say to everyone, if you want to ask any questions, and please ask in the YouTube chat and we will relay them to our tutors. But two questions. First of all, it's do you, I mean, on Xfigura, do you have access to all these different models, or do you have to have subscriptions for those models to incorporate them?
We work with third parties, so the Googles, the OpenAIs, all of the companies. They often offer what are called APIs, and so we're able with our own subscription model, and it's typically $20 or $60 a month, or academic plans are 30% discounted. So you're not going to the many places. You have everything into one. We worry about all of those connections. But we also host our own models. This is a big concern for offices, data security, end user agreements, confidential data. So we have AWS servers. We never retrain the models. So it's trying to balance the third parties with, we call them enterprise secure models.
Yeah. So you just sign up for Xfigura and you haven't got to worry about signing up for the individual platforms. That's interesting. And it's okay, that's very interesting. What was the cost to sign up? Basic cost? Are there different levels or the
Yeah, it's very so it's we have the starter, it's a very SaaS standard model. So 20, it's based on credits, and the professional. For enterprises, we have full custom workflows. Annual is discounted. If you are a student, feel free to email us and you have access to more than 30% discounts on the platform too.
Okay, great. The other question is, I mean, maybe I missed this, but are you saying that the 3D issue has effectively been resolved? We haven't got to go to 3D splatting. We just go directly through these models.
I would say the production readiness of these procedural workflows is not there yet. It's fully on a fast track mode, and there's several startups also in this space. Our full product roadmap is in 3D. So we're definitely going to see in months and not more than that, production ready, workable models. Architects and meshes don't merge very well unless you're comfortable with Blender, Maya, ZBrush, or everything in between. So we need to bring it into a BIM ready or editable ready format.
Okay, great. All right, let's thank you, George. That was incredibly interesting. Let's move on to Karla. Karla, great to see you again.
The same. I'll share my screen now. All right. So I will present a explorative pipeline or framework to think about generative AI. And I'm going to go through a notebook that I created, and I'm going to explain my current way of thinking on how can we operate with these, what I'm calling new space of possibilities, which are challenging the way that we think about what Vitruvius said on sonographies, because probably these are the new sonographies of our architectural practice. So right now what we have is that we can have a text input and then immediately you can get an image output. And so we've seen this through George's platform that this is kind of trivial already. So it doesn't really, this has been already resolved. What I was curious about this is that when you get to the one or to the many already formalized images, what's the process in between getting to that image? So I started looking at these generative models, and what I'm doing with them is that instead of narrowing down to the image, which is the final output of this prompt, I'm really curious to see how did all the different layers that are encoding the text materialize into an image, because we understand that a single image of 100 by 100 pixels could have a exponential combinatorial problem because every pixel could be any RGB value. So I did some explorations, like, for example, querying them with specific information, like I want to see what's the output of the city with timeless connectivity, what's the output of, for example, here, the idea of having threshold shadows and light. How did all of those words really come into creating this final output? So I played a little bit with different keywords, and we've developed several, I call them space of possibilities, because what is interesting for this exploration is not to look at the final image, but actually to explore around. And there may be some in-between concepts that were not precisely aligned to what we say, but could help you understand other experiences, or at least formulate other ways of representing the concept that you're trying to grasp. So by doing this exploration, I gather about 10,000 images of all of these space of possibilities using the different keywords to generate. And I decided to kind of encode them again to see how will we interpret them. So then we go to the idea of how do we then go back to a process where these images are encoded into specific ways of looking at them. So, for example, if we go to ways of seeing, right, we have one image, we can encode this image based on the RGB values, which could be just as a rasterized image. So we understand what are the pixels that are darker, brighter, and so on. And then that could immediately be transformed into a set of numbers that then we can operate again. So these images stop having the meaning that they got attached from these human aligned prompts, but they started being much more rich in the sense that we can operate them since they are right now into a number space. You can also look at them by the edges. So the same way, transform them so they can be analyzed and transform or encoded into numbers. Or you can even look at them based on the objects included on the images by using a object detection algorithm. What is an interesting position about ways of seeing at your data is that there is kind of a sense of operation and agency that you can more or less guide through the process. And this feels like a human-centered approach to operating with this vast space of possibilities, with this idea of in-between concepts. And so I tried one other way of seeing at the data, and this is using a function that is called Fourier transform function. And this is mostly used for encoding sound waves. But since our data is really numbers, in the sense of if I look at any of these outputs that are already numbers, I can treat them as a sample, as a data that lives in a sample space, and then use that to create a new way of encoding data that maybe because this is such a this algorithm synthesize information very efficiently, then I can have maybe a new feature vector or a new feature space where these images are sharing not only color or edges or meaning, but much more, or all of them all together. So now that I have transformed all of the images that I've collected through this Gen AI exploration, I decided that, now I have an enormous space to explore. How do I really get to, the meaningful image that I would like to keep operating with? So I decided to work with an algorithm that is called self-organizing map. So if you imagine, it's like you start by defining a grid of a random. You can design a 10 by 10 grid in a 2D space or a 15 by 15. And then what you do is that your new data set, the data that has been already encoded into number, is going to try to find where it fits on the space. And the way to do it, right, is that these nodes here, they also have the same dimension or the same shape as your data. So later, you just need to calculate an Euclidean distance, to identify what's the data where the data goes. And then the interesting thing of this neural network and supervised neural network is that it will adjust all the neighbors around. So at the very end, by checking or testing every single point of your data set to this new grid, it will find and it will train a model of similarities. So I did this. I transformed the different data points that I have into RGB values, into edge detection, and then into objects. But I decided that maybe it will be interesting to do it on the Fourier transform function, since I tried to encapsulate it very synthetically. And so what we're seeing here is just identifying how many elements per cells we have. This is a random image generation. So every time I run this, I'll get a different, a different image every time. So here, for example, we can see the code and the how well the groups or the data has been organized. So we see that, yes, it is not quite, let's say, very defined, but we understand that there are some groups that are similar. For example, this corner over here does have a data that look alike. This corner over here as well, these groups over here. So you can start searching for example, in this case, I selected cell number 139, and then in cell 139, there is all of these images that are that look like. But then what I thought would be interesting is that instead of having to go one by one, maybe we can do a more explorative sense that you can rather select different cells dynamically. So then you can then render them and see all the different options that you have per group, right? We're trying to make sense of this space of possibility. Is there any way that I can have more operative agency here? So, right, maybe, yes, they have been generated in a square space. Can I operate them and with them and have them resize, have them recentered? For example, here, I'm curious to know, can I blend them into one image? So I'm looking at the image from this selection from 1 till 5. Maybe I want to see more options. I want to see image from the number 10 till the 15. And then you start seeing other, I'll say, new ways of looking. So this is the image number 12, but if I want to see this blended to number 16, or I want to be able to go from number 17 till number 21, you can start creating or having a generative agency, bridging all of these space of possibilities. And then you can also do some other operations, like, for example, you have these images that you have selected, you find them to be exciting to work with, and then you can resize them and then start acting or operating them maybe as a color pattern or an idea that can help you define a specific prompt. But you can also try to see if you find one of the images within this space of possibility, you can work with seeing, can I identify the red, green, blue value of these images, and can I maybe operate with one of them? If you look at this, I have selected these 3 images, and if I want to merge them all as considering them as green, red, green, red, green, blue. This is an operation that you can do. There is also other ways to even try to think about what are the edges of these images. Can I do, for example, here, this is to identify what are the key points, or by using a gradient filter, you identify that these are the most representative elements on this image itself. Can I combine them both and identify on the edge image that I have? Can I look at the most representative elements by merging these 2 images? Or I can just simply say, I want to color code every image that I have into a red, green, blue value, and then use one of these to be operated by merging the image that I have selected plus the gradient. So I am using this one and this one. Could I just modify their pixel values to be brighter? Could I just separate this image and only look again as the red, green, blue? Maybe I will like to operate with the green, with the blue, with the green image, and then I like to apply a different color. Like for example, right now I've selected these pearl colors to be, but maybe what is more interesting, I'll say, let's try these gray yellow tones. And then because you are operating in this space where the pixels are modifiable and you are in control, or at least in having this operational approach, that you can simply modify them as they come. But what happened if, right, we go back to our initial selection, the ones that we said, oh, this is interesting to work. I think from here, there are so many other playful activity, well, I will say operations that we can do with them. Like for example, thinking of them as a concept idea, or helping you generate the sensation that you have while being in space. So this has been a explorative method that I used with my students in class to, instead of having the direct output of a Gen AI to be what guides your generative process, rather than doing that, we are exploring everything that allowed us to come up with, or at least to help us find a space of possibility that doesn't necessarily need to lead to one solution or similar solutions like these, but maybe exploring everything that the text really is trying to be encapsulated in images. I think I'm more or less on time, but what I wanted to quickly show today was also to present the, give me 1 second. I need to try to bring this. I'm the director of the SURE Lab, which is in a spatial human center, artificial intelligence research and experimentation here at University of Florida. We have curated set of classes that we teach here at UF, and most of them are within the graduate AI certificate in architecture. And of course, if you are interested in the work that we do in design studios or seminars that we teach, or even small tutorials that we prepare, you can always come here. Everything is going to be available. But what I want to show you is that the effort that we're doing at UF, and particularly University of Florida, is to prepare students to think and talk on the terms that right now the world is moving forward, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning, data-driven. And we do that through a course structure that, for example, presents classes that are about fundamentals of coding and computation, that then moves to artificial intelligence and ethics to architecture, then to machine learning for architects, and later with the design studio project. And you can always see some of the explorations that we do in each class. Of course, when I want to show it doesn't load. It will show you the course curriculum, and then, of course, some of the objectives, the students' output. And one thing that I want to feature this class is that for the class Machine Learning for Architects, we're partnering with George, and we're partnering in order to work with generative algorithms and have the students get hands-on on some of their what they learn technically, but also how do they apply on their current either thesis, because some of these students are already working on their pilot thesis. Other things that we do at the lab, of course, we have an active research agenda that is organized in 2 objectives. So how to use AI as an instrument to empower creativity, and how to use AI as a tool for social good. This is such an important distinction that we have at the lab, because the tools, for example, or instruments themselves have no particular use and are so generic that they require human interaction. So they are like a violin or a pen. Depending on how they have been operated, the output is completely different. And then tools like a motor or a lever, they are created for that one purpose, and they need to be efficient. So you can see on our research that that way of categorizing our research. So there is examples of how we use AI to empower creativity and examples of how we use AI for social good. Recently, the AI for social good has been shifted to digital twins, and that's more of the work that I do with funding projects that have been funded from industry and from agencies and internally at University of Florida. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that we also co-organize conferences, also in line with these two overall ideas of how to use AI to empower creativity as an instrument and how to use AI for social good. To empower creativity as an instrument, we have playing models, and then to AI for social good, we have resilience in urban environments towards SDG sustainable cities. So I really invite you to see through the conference websites, because we will always have the existing recordings from previous years, and then it will be a place where you can get information of how artificial intelligence have been moving from, in the case we started in 2022 until 2025. The last version was at the Carnegie Mellon, and the previous to that was at ETH Zurich, and we have created a large network of architects, designers, and artists that are really excited to talk about artificial intelligence in architecture. And in the case of AI for social good, this is we are concentrated on partnering with universities in South America, because we believe the things that we're experiencing here in the US in relation to weather-related hazards could help or could be a communication, or we could start a discussion to find solutions for both. And so next year, we are in partnership with Urban AI, so we're going to host the fourth version of Resilience in the Built Environment in Paris. All right, I think that is all. I'll stop my screen.
Thanks, Karla. I noticed that some questions are coming in on YouTube. If you have any questions for Karla, please send them into the YouTube chat. So let's move on to Smaro, who is part of the Digital Futures team. So anyway, welcome, Smaro.
Thank you. So I would like to say thank you for welcoming me back. Can you hear me?
Yes, just one thing. It's saying that the connection's unstable. I'm just wondering.
Is it still? If you can hear me okay, I think it may or may not be fine. If not.
Oh, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I would like to say thank you to the Digital Futures teams for welcoming me back. It's a real honor. And also, as somebody who has not always been in the epicenter of like this discussion, and also from Greece, the Digital Futures videos and tutorials have served me very well before I moved into a computer science lab. And it is really a noble pursuit that I really admire and hope that keeps going ad infinitum. So I'm going to start with a bit of a statement. I'm kind of like, as I keep poking at the case of like using AI in architecture, it seems less and less kind of like I would say convincing, not so much the use of AI, but the use of architecture. So what I'm trying to say is that the more I poke at like the new technologies that come out, the more redundant architecture starts to seem. So just to talk about myself a little bit, my name is Smaro. I have a small practice back in Greece. And what I'm trying to say is, and I teach architecture at FAU. I'm doing my PhD in a computer science lab. And I keep kind of compiling these articles that talk about architecture and how there is a decline in the business world. and all these different graphs that just illustrate that, even saying that, you know, maybe at some point we will stop existing. And that was part of like what in other tutorials has been said again and again, that all these technologies can be used by us, can be used by contractors, can be used by civil engineers. There's nothing maybe left with the use of AI that is gonna like keep us in the game for long term. And that's just my prediction. And that's something that's also illustrated in this book by the RIBA, Architect, The Evolving Story of a Profession, where she's talking a lot about the adaptability of the profession through different technological and social advancements, but also that we are amidst a revolution and kind of like facing an ambiguous future. This is a video.
Do you know much about Frank Gehry?
Wait. To me and you that are a bit older, it may not seem like a lot, but to people who are our students, like young people, those are all figures that are in the spotlight, and none of them seem to know somebody that like Frank Gehry or
Who? Frank Gehry, an architect. And he designed this building. Do you like architecture? I do. Do you know who Frank Gehry is? No. Am I supposed to know? Do you know who Frank Gehry is? No. He's an architect. I love him. No. Yeah. No. No.
Do I know who is?
Frank Gehry.
You don't know who that is.
I know who that is.
Like before this interview?
No, I don't. What do I need to know? Is he an architect? Oh my gosh, yeah, I got it. I'm not dumb. Do you know much about architecture?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite?
I like pyramids.
In any case, I'm not trying to say this is just an entertaining remark I wanted to make along the way, but maybe it is time, and it has been time, to move out of architecture and into interdisciplinary collaboration and talk about how do we make others care. As somebody that's like a minority in a computer science lab and has always been like going out and about in like different departments and different schools to do kind of like workshops or like lectures or whatever, having worked with like civil engineers, urban planners, psychologists, medical professionals, I would say that just the connectedness and the interdisciplinary collaboration could be a way to like approach that question of rendering ourselves useful for the future. And that is also something that can be done with, like, we have to approach space in ways and in vocabularies that other people can understand, such as like verbal narratives, ideation for computer scientists, that is algorithmic thinking, interpretation, and that at some point may lead to innovation. So how do we approach AI for the masses? How do we make design more accessible through the use of AI? How can lived experiences be reimagined through the use of AI? And in general, like these are all very broad questions that I wanted to bring into the discussion, just because I've also been encountering them as I poke at it a lot more. And the way I found through it is data gathering as a community building exercise. So data collection can work as a self-reflective tool and a vehicle to provoke thought and steer discussion regarding the built environment. This is something that I've been looking at in many different instances in different collaborations. So sometimes we work from verbal to visual, like either through trying to like brainstorm with different ideas verbally and then turn them into diagrams like floor plans with people that are not native to like architectural thinking and architectural planning. For a workshop that we did in the technical chamber in Greece, working with many different stakeholders for the redesign of a park. Neil was also there giving a lecture a week back before the workshop took place. We kind of like did a multimodal workflow to be able to approach how do different people see parks, how do different people approach public spaces, if they do approach them, how long do they stay, to kind of like try to not create an all-encompassing solution, but try to get many different instances of how that understanding of a park or a redesign exercise could work. So then we moved on from the visual to the experiential. So kind of like trying to navigate how those things come into play in real time. And then from that, we tried to create geometries that could be configured for design purposes, like an OBJ structure, to be able to create rainwater collection stations and other things that promote sustainability in parks. And that project was featured in national TV. Neil was also there. That comes to play with the idea of streamlining. That's a different approach in the sense this is like a little sketch from the AA journals back in the 1970s, found in Bruno Zevi's book, The Language of Modern Architecture. And it's just a bit eerie talking about it today, while it like looks, it's a bit sexist because it's like a product of its time. Nonetheless, the idea of like trying to build based on like speech or text is still there, like very early on. And then another project that I've worked on with the NSF and the Connected Autonomy and Artificial Intelligence Lab engages in Palm Beach, in the main axis of Palm Beach, Clematis Street. And how can real-time Wi-Fi signal sensor data, photo capturing and video capturing can work to create, and crowd simulation can work to create light installations in the area. So we had 59 sensors on lampposts throughout Clematis Street, and those were used to kind of like try to figure out the patterns of movement and work with artificial intelligence and different historic and contemporary data sets. This is like kind of like what I call with my students the low self versus like high self. The high self is something that's like a bit more academic, like you go into archives, you look at things that are older, that are historic, and you try to blend that with something more contemporary, like the image that you would get from like social media of a certain place, and like trying to figure out the midpoint between those two characters of the place that are antagonizing. And then we worked with fine-tuning a diffusion model with the two data sets of Palm Beach Island, creating different elements, and that was used mostly to familiarize the students and the public with how their digital footprint is used in remote signal processing, placemaking through ranging light intensity based on the occupancy data, and understanding the digital to physical infrastructure dipole. And then based on those like AI generated images, we created like AI generated assets, which we then blended and reconfigured into actual like lampposts, kind of like geometries that we then tried to like test it to 3D to print with a robotic arm using a UR10E collaborative robotic arm. And then to look at the macro scale of like in the future of Palm Beach and the fact that this is all going to be submerged underwater in the future, we work with trying to see what the current uses are and trying to like merge them with different walkways that are above sea level or above the projected sea level to create that kind of like imaginative / collaborative with AI image of the future. So yeah, again, that illustrates the problem that is like flood management in South Florida and kind of like tries to create with speculating about the future. Because where we live, by 2080, we're looking at 3 feet of sea level rise. Inland areas of South Florida will also begin to flood, and flooding will be a common and prolonged phenomenon, which we're already experiencing, but maybe not with such intensity. But back to the like kind of like obscure discourse about architecture, like just exiting the debate altogether and not being a discipline anymore. How do we teach identity in 2025? How do we add value to what we do, to our profession? Going around in different art and architecture schools, I've tried to like kind of navigate that question and see what is that architects can bring into the discussion amidst like an AI breakthrough. So for that, I worked in the University of Thessaly for a little while with Professor Ioanna Simeonidou, where we taught a small course about the typology of a polykatοικία, which is a multi-story dwelling with different apartments, and apartment building typology native to Greece. That's very important for the Greek city. And how can we redesign it and reinterpret it using generative AI? So we asked all the participants to go around the city and look for images, elements, and different type of like miscellaneous geometries and parts of the built environment that could be used to then create hybrids or like some sort of like AI fantasy or hallucination, because you see here most of these whimsical elements don't make that much sense, but maybe some of them could be used to reinterpret, reconfigure, and then try to rewrite what a modern polykatοικία, what a contemporary polykatοικία looks like. And for another project, or let's say workshop that I recently taught in my school, in the school that I graduated as valedictorian from, in the School of Architecture in Aristotle. Basically there I tried to introduce the idea of object-oriented programming, because it was an object design course, and tried to work with deciphering how do we make hybrids of things that don't clash. Kind of like also introducing the Freudian idea of unheimlich, but also talking about the instance of a class, the object as an instance of a class, and how can we look at things differently. I'm not gonna like go into all this because I don't think I have the time, but just as an example of something that looks very Dada, like hybridizing what really? So we looked at a menstrual cup and this chair made by Le Corbusier, and how those two objects can be approached as a hybrid. Like what would AI make if you asked of something that's like really unfathomable or like really whimsical? And ChatGPT didn't give many good answers. Nonetheless, other apps, like that was part of the workshop, like testing different apps and seeing what works and what doesn't, kind of like created objects that would look like a Mona Hatoum installation and so forth. And then also like a Diva cup designed by Le Corbusier, and trying to see where that threshold of like insane or like useful or like aesthetic kind of lies, and then reinterpreting that in 3D to start working with it and like start poking at it on Rhino. And lastly, I would like to say that this summer I was teaching modern history and theory of architecture, amongst other things. And for that, I had to kind of like think, how would the person that has like their phone on their hand all day and like is on TikTok, and I don't want to like minimize what like a person that's like 20 right now looks like, but I fear that we're fighting against a very like a declining attention span. And also seeing like previous curriculums for the same course saying, frankly, there should be no reason why you use AI in this class. I kind of like took it upon myself to use AI in this class and see how we can teach the past, interpret the past for the future. For example, like trying to, we talked about many figures of the modern movement, such as Frank Lloyd Wright, and I tried to see where that threshold between representation versus idea lies, because this is a sketch, a very like important like a drawing from the Broadacre city concept that Frank Lloyd Wright had during the 20th century. But like, how would it look if it were to be more so like a rendering? Would it look like a contemporary city? Yes, no? Or also like, how could it look if it was made into a 3D? And for their final project, I tried to make them create a small biopic of certain important figures of the modern movement. And I'm gonna like close with that, Mark. I see it as entertainment, and this particular one looks like a Netflix episode. It leaves out a lot of like important elements, such as like it talks about Adolf Loos, and it like fails to address the fact that he was a problematic figure in terms of like sexist remarks and all these other things. But nonetheless, I think it's rather entertaining. So I'm just like let it play, and then that would be the end of my presentation.
Here's to the bold souls, the dreamers, the rule breakers, the ones who see the world differently. They're not afraid to dream, to push boundaries, and to start where others won't. While some see obstacles, they see opportunity. It reminds us that every journey starts with a single step, and that step can change everything. Because those that are bold enough to take that first step, those are the ones who move the world. And among them, one voice stood apart not for what he added, but for what he took away. A man who believed that simplicity was not just style, it was truth. Now join us for the story of Adolf Loos, one of the few who didn't just design buildings, he dismantled an era. These are the ones who moved the world. In the quiet town of Brno, a boy carves wood in his father's workshop. Surrounded by tools and dust, he learns the language of materials before he learns to speak the language of design. At just 9, Adolf loses his father. The silence of grief carves a deeper understanding of form, of absence, of permanence. He studies mechanics, not art. Art, not style. His mind sharpens on the edge of logic, not ornament. In 1893, he arrives in America. The skyline of Chicago speaks a new language: steel, glass, and purpose. He takes odd jobs: cabinet maker, dishwasher, draftsman. In the grit of labor, he learns what buildings are truly for: people. He finds a mentor in Louis Sullivan. Form follows function, a phrase that would echo through looser life like a mantra. He returns to Vienna, not as a student, but as a critic. A man with a mission to strip architecture of its excess. In 1908, he writes Ornament and Crime, a manifesto against decoration, a declaration of modernism. When the Loos house is unveiled, Vienna gasps.
Is this even architecture?
No columns, no frills, just stone and glass. In a world obsessed with ornament, he carved silence into stone. Here, in the dim glow of the American bar, light dances not on gilded edges, but on restraint on the geometry of thought. Marble, mirror, mahogany, each material speaks, not in flourish, but in presence. Villa Müller stands like a poem in concrete, its room plan unfolding like stanzas. Each room a verse, each level a pause. It is not a house, but a choreography of space, where function becomes form, and form becomes philosophy. And there, on the Michaelerplatz, the Goldman and Salach building gazes across Vienna, its facade a quiet rebellion. No garlands, no gods, just the rhythm of windows, the honesty of surface, the courage to be plain in a world of masquerade. Loos did not build monuments. He built arguments against excess for essence. And in doing so, he left behind not just buildings, but a way of seeing. Space itself becomes the art. He teaches not how to decorate, but how to think. His students learn to see space not as surface, but as structure. In his final years, he stands before his work, not seeking applause, but clarity. A man who stripped away the noise, the excess, the unnecessary. Adolf Loos, the architect who once said, "I have freed mankind from unnecessary ornament." And in doing so, he built something timeless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Smaro. You've got me thinking about things there, about the demise of architecture. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you've been to Sagrada Familia, you would see that actually architecture can have an impact, but I think it's something to definitely to be concerned about. Anyway, we've got some questions in the chat. I'm not so clear which questions apply to which tutor, but let's start with one that is very definitely got the name, and it's a question for George. My question for George: what are your thoughts on integrating real-time feedback loops, such as energy simulation or structural analysis, into the generative design process rather than as post-processing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we tried to address in our Biennale video. There is this big gap between the generative models and these images, these videos you're creating, and the physical world. There's no physics understandings in these data sets, in these trained images. And so in this project, as a provocation, either from participatory design, carbon analysis to new agentic workflows, we combined the generative side of video to video workflows from a drone scan, used a Gaussian splat, recreated the video to video model, and then essentially used that new geometry and it was superficial, as in it was doing a carbon assessment on the facade comparison of a facade before and a facade after. So it's doing segmentation, classification, it's understanding surface area or meter squared, and then you can have a facade comparison of the two. So embodied carbon before, embodied carbon after. How are your decisions? How is your prompting actually having a tangible impact? Now, I think the connection into structural analysis, I will relay the question to Karla, but there's certainly tools in this, and we're working on these LLM-based approach, which also do leverage generative AI. So the possibilities in this space are definitely there. And then we are certainly going to target more simulation workflows in the tool as we go.
I mean, just a comment. I guess that you could simply add these to the platform, but I mean, we've got a session coming up with Infrared City where they do these surrogate models,
Yeah.
which are very kind of they're kind of post, as it were. They analyze it, but you could add that quite easily, or indeed. But I think what is becoming I know what Xcool is doing, and not so much what Autodesk is up to, but the idea of embedding some of these kind of constraints in the program itself, in the generative AI program, that eventually will be there, so it becomes a kind of like a pipeline with all these things embedded in it.
Yeah, and this ties well with the next question, I think, about agents. And we did launch 2 days ago our first agent. So it's text to workflow now, and we're launching memory next week. So it has contextual knowledge of your past generations.
Which
So you,
is that? So which question is that? Just read it out, maybe.
oh,
It we
I
can't
think it's
not
one on uh,
start.
amazing. Will there be agent mode to
Oh
develop
yeah.
documentation?
Yeah.
So you're saying, Neil, you mentioned about like embedding certain knowledge or adding constraints. And so agents can help that. You can add, it's a text-based approach, but you can add contextual knowledge of what you're working on into that text, into that design process. So we'll certainly be launching a bit in that space too.
There's the one above that. In addition to fusion models are powerful for images, but often weak in presenting topological constraints in 3D. Has Xfigura explored geometry-aware diffusion to enforce architectural logic, such as structural grids? Let me read that again. In addition,
So
diffusion models are powerful for images, but often weak in presenting topological
yes.
constraints in 3D. Has Xfigura explored geometry-aware diffusion to enforce architectural logic such as structural grids? Yeah.
I will, in response to this question, I used Spell Shape, which is part of a collaboration with Stefan, to make a grid. So this is using LLMs. I prompted structural grid of a mid-story tower in London. And so it's not using a diffusion model per se from an image, even though actually we're going to add that node, that workflow, so you can actually, in the next release or very soon, you're going to be able to connect your image. Essentially, it does an image to text workflow. It dissects what that image is, and then it adds it as a prompt, and you can condition your procedural workflow. So in this case, as I mentioned, you have that full control over all of these parameters. You can see structure is all there. It won't be coordinated just yet, but that's maybe for another startup. But these structural understandings are certainly there. And maybe Karla, if you want to add to this as well.
Yeah, so I think the question could even go up to how do you create a platform that is able not to only provide modeling resources, but also feedback to the user interaction, and then as well, there are other little or important innovations that need to come forward. So if you think about modeling, there are different levels that are interesting for design and construction and fabrication and so on. So you have, right, the first layer that we're experiencing right now is the geometric based modeling. So we move from images to 3D, but there are another interesting level that is about information models. So those geometrics that we just created, how do you embed semantic meaning to those? And then that's the jump to thinking about creating BIM, right? And then there is the next level, which is about simulation models, which are either mathematically created or they can be surrogate models, right? But I think the idea of, sorry, Smaro, you wanna?
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt. I was just going to say about we've been working with Isaac Sim, back in my lab with NVIDIA. They've been trying to train us, which is a physics-based model for robotic simulation. So that is also something just understanding the physics, not only just the geometrical, the XYZ values, but also how that can come into play with motion and all these different things. I believe it's also somewhat of a question, how do all these things come into play with the physics and the motion of it.
So that for me, that's the next level, which is having this physics AI and the agentic AI. So I don't believe, right, that I not believe, but I think the way to go into modeling is try to increasingly move to this continuum from geometry to information to simulation, and then eventually I call it synthesis, in the sense of having this agent and physics AI embed by building up this capacity from the modeling side. That's what I want to say. And in structural design specifically, you can definitely implement some parametric generative algorithms that could be linked to the text-based models. And that could be the initial stage for any form finding a strategy that you have. And I can copy some links to work that I've been doing on that end. That has been successful in workshops and in classrooms. Yeah, that's one thing about structural design.
And we're getting a clear glimpse into this with the Genie 3 models, which are, they're world models. We'll see in the next few months. The clear use case now is more in the gaming space. It is almost real time. It's like a multiplayer environment. You can pan and walk around these spaces, but they do come with a much higher level of physics understanding. So you can actually, it can have that contextual knowledge. You can do an action in the 3D world, move somewhere else, do something else, and go back to it, and it will remember that scene.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the podcast with Demis Hassabis last night. I think it was just literally come out, and he was talking about Genie 3. And in a way, it seems like there are two kind of modalities. That's a kind of intuitive sort of understanding, almost like reverse engineering, or getting the model to reverse engineer the appearance of things, and it's getting better and better. I mean, the more it's been trained, the better it gets. And certainly, it's remarkable how it seems to be simulating physics, shall we say, or at least appearing to give it from an intuitive perspective. But then there's another area which is becoming increasingly important, which is the kind of the spatial intelligence that people like Fei Li and others are doing, whereby they are training models in 3D. And that seems to me, and it's not easy because you don't scrape 3D off the internet like you scrape images and text. But you can synthesize. You can make synthetic data, and by doing that on computationally, you can speed up the process and so on and so on and so on. And there's clearly a huge amount of work going on there, because that's for the robotic world of the future, of not just humanoid robots or robots, but also self-driving cars. That's the agenda, and there seems to be a lot of really hard work going on in that area, which is not an intuitive thing; it's actually an actual thing, and it also opens up the possibility of 3D form AI form generation. I mean, if we're looking back on the story of 2D, how it all effectively came from image recognition from the ImageNet thing that Fei Li was putting together. Then we got into Deep Dream. That was the kind of, rather than recognize it, you then generate an image. So and then from Deep Dream to GANs and to diffusion models. But then if you're working in 3D, then that would assume if you can recognize 3D, then you can generate 3D. I don't think it's going to be straightforward, but that would seem to be the next step, in which case maybe embedded in that there's a more rigorous understanding of physics that's not just a simulation, but actually
so I've been trying to wrap my head around what do we mean when we're saying we're going to design with this new technology. So if you allow, I can share my screen for like 1 minute, and then I can show how my brain is organizing these categories. So for me, I mean, this is a very simple drawing, right? You could even criticize it, but this is how I'm thinking currently. And the idea is that we've been looking at different ways of designing by leveraging technologies that have been recently been called digital twins. So there is a capabilities of saying existing digital twins are about in the modeling realm, which is in the side of the cyber side, that we need to have a idea of a geometry, right? We have to generate that either manually or using some existing procedural modeling or eventually AI. But that modeling needs to be immersive enough so you understand what you're talking about, and it should visualize the data, and it usually has a single input as a feedback to the user. And then you go for status, which is building up from the geometric models, information models, but then that needs to be data intense. It could have some idea of time, so it can animate, and then it could have a different multi-input or a multi-model approach. Then you go to predictive, where you build AI models that can be for simulation or surrogate models or predictive analytics. It has to be interactive. It is about simulation, and then it has a relation of there is an input from the user, and then you can have an output. And then right now, what I'm thinking where we're going is to creating this idea of intelligence or intelligent environments where we are leveraging all the continuums, right? From the cyber continuum, from the social continuum, because when we're talking about space, it is not a cyber physical system, it's a cyber social physical system. And we need to consider that all the time, not only talking about modeling or about experience, but really how do we build this very cohesive way of leveraging all that we're building. And my idea right now is that, yes, all the time I was thinking about doing it through like every ring, but there are moments where you really can be playful in the sense that not every level of these, I think of them as a spiral, is linear, but you can really jump into levels and have like a in between status and existing, or in between predictive and intelligent. And so depending on the question that you have, the skill that you have, the client, you can really leverage the cyber physical system for designing, constructing, planning, and so on. This is my current thinking, and I that's because for a longer time I was very much invested into modeling, but I was not considering these other really important continuums or categorical differences of how to build this capacity for architects, designers, and artists. So that's my current thought that I have, and of course I'm really happy to chat about it. I'm writing an article so I can share my current thinking to people who wants to read it and then listen to feedback about what you think.
Yeah, that I'm also writing about. Maybe we could exchange these. But I mean, I think what's interesting right now is in terms of the concept of intelligence, there is a book that's coming out in just over a week's time, Blaise Guriakos, on a theory of intelligence. Now, he is looking at things in a very different way to Fei-Fei Li. Fei-Fei Li is looking at it in terms of spatial intelligence, where Blaise is more based on a kind of abstract notion of LLMs. It's kind of almost like intellectual intelligence. And it's kind of interesting that Blaise doesn't talk about spatial intelligence in his book from the late draft that I saw. But it seems to me that spatial intelligence with robots really coming on stream is going to be the thing very soon. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe XR will finally make it after the professed in 5-year periods. It's yeah, I think now we've passed form factor, so we can have fully experienced spaces. And I like to speculate even with students and say, now we can encode thought. We can decode thought. That's not only as text, but also as images. And if we have text and image, we can have a 3D model. And so the full end-to-end loop becomes thinking a project or dreaming a project and having construction documentation with all the parameters Karla you're describing. Imagine like an experiential model from just a thought. Imagine client conversations in that case.
Yeah.
So there's a question for Karla in the chat. Karla, in your presentation, you highlighted cultural roots plus spatial and human-centered AI research. How can AI embed local cultural identities in design while still working with global data sets? Do you see it as a tool for preserving diversity, or is there any risk for creating more homogenized results? That's a good question.
It's a really good question. And this quick demo that I prepared for this session was trying to kind of answer this question. We understand now that all of these generative models have seen and read everything. So they have become this common knowledge or common sense where we can draw what we have created and help us move forward to new ideas, or how do we merge them to create something new, right? So the idea of prompting them with very social driven questions like cultural roots or space, that helped me create a large data set of what I think, as I just said, common sense or common knowledge. And then by me going into a more specific process of operating with them, then I was embedding the human-centered approach, which means that right now, the way that I advise or I encourage students to work with is not to take the final output as for granted, or at least as the thing that you would like to work with as a generative example, but to operate it and make it yours in the sense that you can really modify it and find or bring meaning and use it in a way that helps you in a generative process for the project to move forward. So how to embed this human-centered approach is to think of these generative or AI in general as an agent for collaboration rather than a tool that will give you something out.
Maybe just to add, Karla, I completely agree. I think every region and every country, it's being discussed at the level of LLMs broadly with the bigs out there. Everyone should have their own data set and train their own models with, local specificity, vernacular, cultural paradigms. Every country should bring in that within their image, possibly soon 3D, but especially now from a language perspective. And I don't agree with the notion of AI leading towards conformity and homogenization. If anything, I call AI augmented imagination, but great topic for debate.
But then will you say, I mean, homogenization and common sense are, I think, not the same, because I don't believe AI will provide the same when you prompt it with the same keywords. It will always have a variety of options. But what I'm thinking of when I say common sense is more like it has seen and read everything. So you will be able to discover through its knowledge, like through its intelligence. So the ability of discovering is still quite present into AI. I'm thinking that a creative process, like the idea of creativity, may be like a combination of AI and human right now with the way that we operated with it. But I still believe that if you think conceptually that that's kind of your new, like you're the common sense, like if you will see when you prompt something, that's what everybody, or like a majority of people will think that's a house, that's a tree, that's a car. So it has been human aligned in the sense that it is producing exactly what we imagine it will be, right? Regardless of its geometric modifications, we will identify that as to be that building. So yes, for discussion. I don't know. I'm really curious to know what Smaro thinks about this.
Well, I would say that it's about also the interpretation or like the segmentation. I really like George's point in terms of like the model segmentation, because there are in every picture, like, as you know, like low resolution or like, you know, low quality, it may be sometimes, or like missing the mark of what we're trying to see. Like there are characteristics that are latent or like that do not really like take up, if it's an image, like 80% of the image or not even the focal point. But if you have a trained eye and a trained perception, you see through what you want to like take out and kind of like magnify as an element. So I think that is really the discussion here. Like, how can we start like pinpointing and kind of like being more precise in terms of like the parts that we're trying to pull up? Because it's gonna be, from what I see, like an endless, you know, remixing and hybridizing for the foreseeable future in a very new and like innovative way. It's not like it's gonna be like a recycling process, but it has to be that we throw out things that tell the story better, or like this, like hit the mark. Like bullseye, rather than just being like beating around the bush. That is something that I see, that also like being more immediate and being like more close to what we've envisioned is like also an opportunity that presents itself with generative AI, just because of like that kind of like very quick streamlining of like different images that we can take away elements from and like pick and choose from. Because what you were presenting as well with like the light shadows, for example, or like those types of ideas back in the day, to even test that or to even create, like there was no simulation, or like that would have to be all manual and very laborious, and it may not work at the end of the day. Whereas now we can have like a very streamlined from like the imagined to the build. So I think that's really exciting to begin with, right?
Can I just before it's disappeared, go back to that kind of the idea of homogenization. And for ASCAD, I've just been looking at I'm going to be the ASCAD in Riyadh in 3 weeks or something, and 4 weeks. And I'll just read out the theme: decolonizing architecture, AI computation, and the future of localized design. Architecture has long been shaped by Eurocentric narratives, from the dominance of Western architectural styles to colonial planning models that continue to influence cities worldwide. These biases extend into contemporary design, often marginalizing local identities, indigenous knowledge, and vernacular traditions. With artificial intelligence, computational design, and data-driven methodology rapidly transforming the built environment, there is an urgent need to assess whether these technologies will reinforce or dismantle architectural hegemony. Germany. AI has the potential to serve as a tool for decolonization by fostering localized, inclusive, and sustainable design practices, shifting design tools from mechanisms of global homogeneity to platforms of cultural empowerment. Well, I came across a slightly well, okay, let me just give you a couple examples of this. I actually think that the data is far more specific and embedded in its context than often we give credit to. I remember once that Wan Yu He from Xcall was saying that they couldn't use data from Japan because it had embedded in it all the kind of the building codes and things of Japan, and it wasn't useful in somewhere like China. So it was context specific. And then I had this experience, which I think George will relate to very well. Somebody said, "Why don't you do a house extension, generate a house extension?" And I did, and I thought this is weird, because what I'm getting is British buildings and gloomy weather, which kind of go together, right? British buildings, gloomy weather, and then I realized what was happening was it simply that the word house extension was used exclusively in the UK. In the States, it's something like home improvement or something like that. It's not a term that's used there. So I was getting this kind of local knowledge embedded into it. And this is why, in some senses, prompt engineering is so difficult, because everything is associative. All the data is associative in some ways. You might, put Louis Barragan's name into a prompt, and you'd get not just Louis Barragan colors and Louis Barragan forms, but also a bottle of tequila or whatever, or kind of cactuses or God knows what else. So and specifically, I think Mexican sunshine, Mexican lighting conditions, and so on. So I actually think that it's more embedded in its context. All the data is, if you can find a word to include in the prompt that will draw that out. Yeah.
Can I add something to what you just said as a non-native American speaker? Like language, I speak 6 languages, so I can understand kind of like how different, like in different languages, you can describe the same thing in many different ways, how some concepts are easier described in some languages rather than others. Some concepts just like don't exist in other languages, especially like grammatically or so. So the thing being that what you're saying is true, like everything is embedded in what we're saying. So like extension is just hints at the fact that somebody British is using it, or like it's used in a British context, and then all the images are gloomy. But on top of that, like it's still a very like Anglo-centric kind of like debate. Whatever we can have in these models is mostly like proliferated through the use of the English language. And that means that the history, or like whatever we're experiencing now, is written by all these like people that can speak English, which you can argue that it's everybody. But I would also argue that there are other models, such as like only like Chinese centric, like by population, more people speak Chinese than they do English as their native language, and so forth and so forth. So that means that we're getting part of the picture. Like I don't speak Chinese, so I cannot like make a one-to-one comparison of things like that. But what I'm trying to say, like back to the ASCAD thing, is also like I come from a place that used to be Ottoman and then became Greek. The language remained the same for a certain part of the population, but the history and so much the spatial history and the spatial styles changed to like accommodate that change in like the national narrative. And that's part of what I'm also presenting in ASCAD about Ottoman Baroque in Greek territory and stuff like that. And how like we can hybridize between the style and the language and the history through using AI. But what I'm trying to say is that we're still living in a world that's mostly like monopolized by the use of English and by the use of like a Eurocentric or like Western-centric model. And I think that is like inescapable to a certain extent, because even our language, like, we say pre-Hispanic, Mesoamerican, or like, and all these different notions like mean different things in English, and they mean different things in Spanish, for example. So I don't know, like there's a semantic kind of like dissonance when it comes to many of these things that have to do with the local and the global. I don't know if Karla wants to add into that.
Yeah, I always call these large English language models. I think that's what they are, regardless of the translation that they have, right? We are also using the same logic behind to translate any other language to English. So then therefore you can leverage the existing, models that have been trained on that language. So, but I actually have a positive side. I mean, not a positive, but at least I think I found a workaround to help me leverage the idea that I don't only think or speak English, but it's to be able to identify ways to describe the same thing in my mother tongue, which is Spanish, and then see how that relates to English whenever I'm trying to like either prompt or even write. I think the idea of even making the translation in your head helps to enrich an idea to make it a bit different than if you will only come in the one language that you think and then write. So of course, I understand that there is this idea of, right, that we are just seeing one option, one version, just because of language. And as Neil was saying, images, and they already have a cultural embedding. But if you think maybe in the way that I'm saying, that because we do have the ability to translate that in our brains, we can really move forward and like be critical in the ways that we're seeing reading and operating with.
Yeah, and it's important to remember no data set is objective. Everything is biased, everything has subjectivity. And so that's partly what I was saying. Each country, each region, maybe through, governmental or through cultural institutes should feed into these companies and help, have a locally specific LLM, locally specific image or 3D model. So there should be more mechanisms. I know the EU is very much active in this space, but not many other countries are. We should build out these custom models to avoid any of these cultural appropriations or any of these issues.
But they're expensive, right? I mean, you could do that. But it's extremely expensive to put together the data for that.
Well, there are ways around working with existing models. You can fine-tune models, where the classic example for images is to use things like LoRa models. It's not a perfect one, but you can, at least in a classroom or within a professional context, embed your own practices, knowledge, your own aesthetics. So there are workarounds. It's not it's not universal, but you're right in saying they're expensive.
Yeah, but also the paradoxical thing is that if you've got a generic name like John Smith, it'll be useless, right? You put that in a prompt and you get nowhere. But Zaha Hadid is unfortunately in some ways a very good name because it's got a high media profile and it's quite unique. I think Björk Ingels must be another one, but so in some level it's about specificity as well. Yeah.
But also about media presence and media footprint, because what I was looking at when I first started looking into AI, like many, many years back, it was mostly like many things that have had cultural significance before the use of like the digital sphere, and were big in like any discourse, like architectural discourse, do not have that same impact online because they were never like proliferated in with the same rigor and the same manner online. Whereas now, like every other article is about Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, and so forth, and it just shows a very skewed image of these people like standing above everything else architecturally, which of course they are very significant, and as we saw, they are recognizable, but not so much in other circles. But it's just that there's not as much like a quality in what really holds. Like, for example, Piranesi, if you Google that and you see how much less of like a data set or like whatever information you can get versus Zaha or like Bjarke or whatever, that doesn't like really sound very fair to the discussion or to the discourse, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about media presence. Just to go back just briefly to what your comment about people not knowing who Gehry is. I mean, I haven't got a TV, right? So I'm not a good person to ask, but I would imagine that, everybody probably knows about who is the person who presents home improvements on a particular channel or something, that's the person they know. Or indeed, in the UK, we have all these ridiculous kind of cooking competitions, the Great British Bake Off, and they will probably know the name of the person who won the Great British Bake Off, but they wouldn't know a very significant, one of the most famous sort of restaurateurs in the world. So it's kind of trying to colonize those spaces, really, in some senses. That's how you get to be popular in some ways. We've got, so just go back to this. We've got George, you're very popular. You've got a couple of questions here for you, George. My question, okay, here we are, for a YouTube question from Matteo Cornejo, I can't pronounce that right, Baus. My question for George is, in Xfigura, will you implement an agent LLM to help with documentation and more technical feedback?
Yeah, it's a great question. We, as a general framework to kind of give an insight of where we're working towards, it's along the lines of what we commonly discuss internally. It's design intelligence. What does that mean? It goes across multiple different types of representation. We are in concept design stages now, and a huge use case goes beyond just the generation of the building. It goes into operations, leveraging these language models in simple search, retrieval. So these concepts broadly, I'll leave it at that, are certainly in our product roadmap. But there's certainly a lot there, and the architecture is very much constant. So your use cases are, it's whatever. It's completely multimodal. So agentic workflows are great for this. Stay tuned.
I often question that. What does design intelligence mean? I think it's I don't know. There is often, the word smart is often used to try and lend credibility. Smart water, smart car, smart whatever. And I'm not quite sure what design intelligence means, except for the fact that platform design intelligence had to withdraw its ranking list of schools of architecture because it hadn't done its intelligence. It did all rather biased in the way that it presented things. Yeah. Meanwhile, there is a big debate about intelligence in the world of neuroscience and AI, and hence the book by Blaise and so on. Another question for George. Xfigura seems to position itself as a bridge between generative AI and parametric design logic. How are you approaching the representation of architectural geometry? Is it mesh-based, parametric, or graph-based? And how do you see that influencing scalability towards BIM level precision?
A great question. The hello world today is very much, image to 3D. That geometry today it's mesh. Now we've just launched Spell Shape. That's a text to parametric model. You have sliders. There is the possibility of exporting that geometry as a GHX file. So you'll still have access to all the parameters, even within the Rhino environment. The workability of these tools, let's say the precision that we need as architects I would say, is still not quite there. We still have to rely on, parametric 3D modeling environments, connecting LLMs to these. But we are working in this space as we go in the next 6 months. We have a lot of new launches coming up in the next 2. But graph neural networks, BIM 2.0, all of these discussions are all on the table. I'd love to get any feedback along the way if anyone wants to reach out.
Can I just ask a quick question of you, George? I'm intrigued by well, first of all, when you've you've got this platform for all these different models, have you got consent from the models to do that, or how does it work exactly? Because effectively they're missing out on individual subscriptions from individual users, right? So at the same time, as soon as
we're expanding their use there.
Well, that's right. They're expanding their use, but they're not getting any revenue for it.
No, they are getting revenue. We act as the middleman for many models.
Oh,
and
I
so
see.
When we use Gemini, we pay Gemini. Actually, the VO3 are 3 models, the video models. They're the most expensive ones we have. We pretty much take zero margin over that. For models we host, it's GPU based, it's predictable. We know exactly what we can work with.
Can
And
I
so,
give a very
mhm,
vulgar example
yeah,
of what that is? Like, it's as if you have a product, like you produce, I don't know, like a can of soda, and then Walmart asks you, like, Guida would act as Walmart, like he has all these different models and he has them like in the store to sell. But it's like it's the exact equivalent because he compiles all the models together for them to work rather than just going and to the factory and sourcing each of these different
Yeah, but so just to clarify, do you pay each of these the owners of the models the per use a per use basis or
yeah. So just to kind of just to give a glimpse into this, it means that for Nano Banana, for a generation, part of the single image generation goes to Google, and then a very small percentage would come, let's say, from a business perspective to us. And so it is that's how we offer, you know, we have Flux, we have OpenAI, Ideogram, Gemini, Flash 2.0. That's how we offer all of those in one place.
George, I think maybe you have to talk about the credits because you get credits to play with these models. So you get a subscription that gets you 25 or 400 or 1,000 or 20,000 credits. And so by credits, you mean that that's the access that you have to play with all of these models. And I will guess that, yeah, you can go forward with that.
That's spot on.
no, so okay, let's answer my question. So basically you're just you're the middle person feeding out these credits to these individual models, and they do.
That's the base. We offer a lot more, but yes, that's a big offering.
Yeah, well, at one point though, it becomes an interesting sort of model when maybe they want to be part of that, right? So it's a bit like, you know, on the movies where, you know, Coca-Cola pays a movie maker to place a can of Coke in the scene kind of thing. Maybe at some point there's going to be some demand to be in your package, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our collaborations was with someone else, so sometimes we integrate with like researchers or the intention is to create the ecosystem. So the node really, actually you can create templates, share them with teams, but the idea is it's like NAN for those maybe a little more technical. You can create your whole pipeline. So what does that then mean for architecture? Can we keep visibility, oppose the no UI AI trend, and give architects that multimodal control that we need to design?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I just wanted to, before we lose this idea of between parametric and generative, I think right now a lot of the work on that end is that you're trying to leverage both in the sense that, for example, right now I have a funded project with NVIDIA, which is to create a very I will say a generative tool from drawn images to very well-defined buildings. That's not yet there. If you look at all of these different models, they have been trained with objects, general objects in our world that go from a cup to a minifigure, but then they don't have enough information from buildings itself. So the idea of like the size of the windows, or if there is like the regular multi-housing building. So what we're doing right now with our group is we are creating a very large data set of buildings of the world that has specific metadata about the texture, the geometry, and their use, together with information about specificities of amount of windows, where doors, the type of materials. So you can use these close to 50,000 buildings to train a trellis model. Of course, you will need to do that with with a supercomputer, and that's the luxury that we have here at UF, that we can really leverage that training because it takes about 64 GPU to train the model. And then our idea is to be able to create this pre-trained model to generate cities of the world. And then jump to the question about the urban infrastructure. So why am I saying this? Is because we're talking with George that eventually this will be a model that can live in Xfigura. That will be something that could be sourced out. Because it's an academic practice, of course, there is like a lot of things to talk about, but there are, like, if we can think about creating a semantic 3D model, that will be the way of trying to, even before training the model, embed information about the things that you care. If in our case for buildings, we care about windows, materials, doors, texture, and so on, that will be the things that will come eventually already embedded into the building itself.
I guess alongside your model, George, there's a kind of parallel model whereby firms like, I think, Xcool and Autodesk are trying to kind of come up with a kind of comprehensive platform pipeline, where everything is in it. So you needn't go anywhere else. Just go to Autodesk, just go to Xcool or whatever, and it's got all produced there. And that itself is kind of attractive in some senses. I think one of the challenges for someone like myself, who I've got various I'm paying to use various platforms, and is that when one platform kind of fades away into the background, do you maintain your kind of do you keep paying for the use of it? And so when Midjourney started producing videos, did I need to use Runway to produce videos and so on? It's quite a challenge with more and more of these platforms, these models proliferating, knowing which one to actually buy into and subscribe to.
So, and we like to call ourselves the AI noise catchers. And so it took us a day and a half to launch the Nano Banana. On Monday, we'll probably launch the latest C-Dense 4 model. But we have full documentation. It'll always be at the top of the list. And so you don't have to even worry about the Midjourney video model, which actually isn't the best performing. And Midjourney, for those who don't know, retrains your data. So it's not something usable within a professional context for NDA agreements, confidential information. So a little caveat there.
Your data, meaning what? Meaning what, sorry?
Well, I would undeniably say Midjourney is one of the best in terms of image quality. And a part of the reason that it's able to achieve that is that it retrains based on your personalized inputs, based on the likes. So that Midjourney aesthetics is kind of like a collective consensus where aesthetics should be, which is, a problem in itself. But that's why we need to use models that are either open source, who explicitly in their end user agreements do not take your data and certainly don't retrain your data.
No, but it is quite useful to get it to customize your preferences, right? I mean,
Yeah, from a consumer perspective, absolutely. From an enterprise level, there's no way a client, even from a legal perspective, there's no legal team in any architecture practice who will be, oh yeah, you just train our NDA, you train our data, don't worry. So it's balancing what models are ways to use.
We should wrap up soon. I just want to try and think of a way to get these addresses. I can read them out, but it's maybe not that easy.
No, I think they can be sent on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Yes. Do you want to maybe Mitra, you could put those names onto the chat. Also for Smaro as well, I guess.
I did it before.
You've done it already. Okay, great, fantastic, good. Okay. All right. Well, I think we should try to wrap up now, because it's these things can go on forever, and it will go on forever if you let it. But I think, thank you so much for today's contributions. It always kind of comes together with the chat afterwards, where it all begins to sort of reinforce one another in some senses. But we got a glimpse into what I think is going to be a very successful platform with Xfigura today. We got some and also some glimpses into two doctoral, those are PhD in the world of AI, who are kind of cutting edge. And I'm sure that both Karla and Smaro are going to have a huge impact in the future. There's one final YouTube comment just come in from Sarah Agili. could you share insight into the entrepreneurial side of developing AI tools and workflows in architecture, particularly how to initiate, fund, and sustain innovation while maintaining healthy margins? That's a huge question. I think we should have a separate. We could maybe do that because we've got yourself, and we've got Carlos Bagnon and also Daniel Bolajan going into that. So that could be a separate session in itself. But I don't know if you've got a very short response to that, George.
My very short response is, one, just go for it, and two, with all of these new vibe coding tools, increasingly in the next few years, we'll be going by this idea of all you need is just an idea. And so you can actually leverage these tools to help create a front-end, back-end AI agents to be your marketing team, form a team, get started, get ideas flowing, join an accelerator, and just test it out. Happy to chat more about this, of course.
And I was listening to a podcast the other day on vibe coding, where basically it said, well, just do it, and you learn on the job above everything else. But yeah, okay. I just wanted to mention that tomorrow we have another session with Karla Ratti. On our Sundays we've got a kind of theory question on the series on the theme of intelligence, and tomorrow's is kind of based on the Venice Biennale, for which Karla is the curator this year, and the notion of intelligence, the kind of concept that he put together to inform this year's Venice Biennale. And after that, we have Stephen Wolfram, who is a giant in the world of computing. He will be there next week and also the week after. And then we have Catherine Hales, who is a philosopher, but she has a fantastic book that's just come out from, I forget the name of it now, but looking at AI as well. So, and it carries on. We'll have Philippe Morel coming in November. We're going to have Patrick Schumacher and Refik Anadol in person. If you happen to be in Miami or close to Miami, we'll also make it into a podcast. And then we'll have Blaise Goriakos in next semester. Which kind of reinforces the Miami, the Florida-based thing, because the reason you can get Blaise is his mother lives in Miami. But anyway, there's a lot happening. Next week we have text to video or video generation coming on. So thank you so much to our presenters today. It never ceases to kind of warm my heart that people are willing to share their passion on a Saturday morning or afternoon. Thank you so much, and thank you also to the Digital Futures team doing all the work behind this, especially Mitra, who has been live streaming today, and also Giovanna, who was helping put it together, posters, and so on and so on. It's a team effort. So thank you, and see you next Saturday, and also see you tomorrow for those interested in listening to Karla Ratti. Okay, ciao. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.